Hi, I'm Dr. Charlene Walters, author, business and branding mentor, trainer, as well as your host for Launch, a business talk show for anyone who wants to launch their business, their career, or their life. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Launch. I'm your host, Charlene Walters, and today I have another amazing guest for you. Her name is Dr. Christy Bundakamara. Welcome, Christy. How's it going today?
Thank you. Well, being an entrepreneur and squeezing in things like podcasts and interviews is stressful. But we're going to be talking about how do we manage all of that. So
Definitely, definitely. Well, thanks for joining us. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
So I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner with over 20 years of clinical experience. I started Mentally Strong about 6 years ago after my son's death in 2016, and never really thought I was going to be an entrepreneur, but I knew that I had to share the how, like how was I actually managing the intensity of the stress that I've been through, from a professional standpoint as a psychiatric nurse practitioner and just as a mother. And so being a woman, being an entrepreneur, being someone who was a caretaker and has experienced extreme grief and trauma, and how do you actually be successful in the midst of managing all that?
It's definitely a lot, and I commend you for all you've done and how you keep moving forward no matter what happens to you. It's definitely very admirable. And some people even consider you an expert in grief. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why that is?
Well, unfortunately, over the course of 20 years, I have lost three children and most recently my husband. And I have experienced every type of grief. I am a mental health professional. I understand neurobiology, psychopharmacology. I prescribe medication, but I also counsel. I'm a huge proponent of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so when I say I'm a grief expert, it is not only through professional education, but it's also through life experience.
You definitely have had some serious experiences, unfortunately, with grief. And, I think it definitely aids in your ability to relate to others who are going through this. And you've, gone out of your way to help so many people. Why do you think some people shy away from grief?
It's painful. Just saying those words right now, I'm, tearing up a little bit, right? Like, grief is pain. And in our culture, we don't like pain. We shy away from pain. We take pain medicine. We want things to process and move on quickly. And grief needs to be processed. We need to feel the pain. We need to feel in order to heal. And we don't like that, right? Like as soon as I say that, people are, it's too much. It feels too painful, or they minimize their grief. Someone lost a grandparent to old age and feels like it's significantly impacting them, but they're not supposed to feel pain because, it was a natural process, right? So we shy away from it, whether it's intense because the pain is too much, or if we feel like it is a natural part of living and we should not feel pain associated with it. So either way, we as a culture, I think most developed cultures are just not processing grief or talking about grief.
Yeah, which is so unfortunate because you really need to do so, or otherwise it'll come back to get you at times when you're least expecting it. You've mentioned everything you've been through, and definitely my heart goes out to you. And, it's been a lot. Do you ever feel like it's just not fair?
Absolutely. And, I talk a lot about how, and I help people. So I have a comprehensive psychiatric clinic. I hear horrible stories of not just grief, but trauma that people have experienced. We look at world events that are happening, and the injustice of this world just doesn't seem fair, and it doesn't seem loving. And but that is a reality for so many people. But when it's our pain, we want to hold on to it and justify feeling sorry for ourselves. And I I've been there. I go there sometimes, but I often encourage people, like, you have to get out of that mindset of it's not fair. Um, because, and this is something our parents told, Gen X parents told us, that life isn't fair, move on. There's a there's a that's not healthy either, right? Because then we're, like I said in the beginning, then we're not addressing grief at all. We're pushing it to the side, and we're saying, we just have to move on. That's part of life. It is your story. One of the choice opportunities, which are just worksheets that give you an opportunity to make a positive choice, is being comfortable in your story. No matter how difficult your story is, being comfortable in it and feeling strong despite it. I mean, we all love to hear a story. Like right now, the Olympics is going on, and we love a story of hardship and then success. But when the hardship is on us, it feels too much, right? And that's what we're talking about when we talk about mindset. I think sometimes mindset and manifestation gets like this magical thinking thing, like, oh, if you just think positive, positive things will happen. And then you're trying to think positive, and all this life stuff just keeps hitting you.
So you were talking about how everyone, struggles, and then they want to think positively, but they aren't always able to, because things happen. They're kind of thrown at them when they're trying to be in a better mood and get in that better mindset. Why does this happen, and how can we kind of change our thinking a bit?
Well, I can tell you from my perspective of feeling like, when you're young, your parents should take care of you. Then, if you have a belief system, God should take care of you. And if you're we get subconsciously taught that if we just do the right things, then positive things will happen. If we just think positive things will happen. And there is some truth to that. I can tell you, the more you think negative, the more you will see negative. And there is an area in the brain called the reticular activating system, which is your filter. And they talk about this, like, if you all of a sudden were thinking about buying a Tesla, you would see Teslas all over the place. Whereas if you didn't even know Teslas existed, they'd be there, but you wouldn't see them. Right? You wouldn't see them very often. But when you bring something to your attention, you see it more. And so if you start thinking, like if I start thinking, gosh, I'm not smart, I can't do this, I'm never going to be successful in business, I'm going to notice my mistakes. I'm going to feed into my mistakes, right? Then I'm going to probably make more mistakes because I'm nervous about my mistakes, right? So the manifestation and positive thinking is really about your mindset to see the positive in the midst of the reality that it's negative, right? And I heard this 60-40 rule one time, and I really liked the way it was presented. So when we think about positive thinking, because we kind of live in this scientific world, we're like, well, if it's true, then every time I do it, it will happen. Right.
Right.
But the reality is it's like this 60-40. If you're thinking positive, most of the time, 60% of your life manifests that positive, but you still have 40% of hardship like everybody else. Right.
Right.
Whereas if you're thinking negative, you're you're focused on that, and 60% of, but it's still only 60% negative. Like you're only adjusting by 10-20% by
Right.
thinking positive or thinking negative. But if you're thinking positive, 60% positivity is coming your way, but you're also happier because you're thinking positive more often, right? So, but the 40% of hardship and difficulty in your life is still happening. And when and it's easy, especially when you've been through intense things like myself, of just continuing to have hardship. We went from Johnny, my 13-year-old son, dying in a drowning accident in 2005. And by 2006, my son Reggie was diagnosed with a terminal condition, 10 years of medical trauma, and then his death in 2016. And then Maya's death in 2021, and most recently my husband, right? And so it would be real easy for me to say, well, that's more than 60% hardship.
Right.
But I also have some amazing blessings in my life that other people don't have, right? I have a very good relationship with my sister, my best friend, my other sibling, Zach, we're very close. My mother and my father, although divorced, I have a very good relationship with them. And we have an amazing family. I have lots of really good friends who care a lot about me. And so, yes, I've had tremendous loss, and I could focus on how horrible that loss is, or I could focus on, wow, I have some pretty amazing people in my life.
That's really excellent advice because I think you're right. I know you're right that sometimes we like to focus on the negative, which is only going to bring more in. And the fact that you're able to kind of switch it to the positive at times when you need to is really important. You talked about some of this before, but people grieve for all kinds of reasons. What else can they grieve about besides just deaths? And can we grieve in relation to our businesses?
Absolutely. I think that is one of my biggest stressors of failing in business, right? Like,
Yes.
and we have to acknowledge how our previous life and things that we have not processed properly impact our decisions in business. So I'm a business person. I run a multi-million dollar psychiatric clinic, and I'm afraid of failing. Why am I afraid of failing? You know, what would happen to me? Probably not much. I have other resources, right? But I have this core belief that has happened over the course of 20 years because I fought for my son's life, and I did everything to try to reverse this terminal condition that was happening in him. And I got this mindset that hard work does not equal success.
Right.
Because he passed away, right? So I have to fight that when I'm, putting in hard work for the business of,
Right.
you know, this is so there's other types of grief also. What if you lost a business? There's so many entrepreneurs that I've talked to that their first and their second and their third business failed before they found or they learned what they needed to learn, right? I think entrepreneurship is definitely a self-development process. It's
To say the
it's kind of
least.
like it's kind of like raising kids. Like,
Right.
you have to grow and develop as a person to be a successful parent, and you have to grow as an entrepreneur, as a person, to be a successful entrepreneur. And you do have to grieve, losses. I have not lost a business, but I've lost people who I really thought were in this, business with me for the long term, and I had to grieve that. There's Grieving is any loss that is impacting you, and impacting you not just in the sadness of the loss, but in the way that you talk about yourself. So like when I gave the example of fighting for Reggie's life for 10 years, I not only having to grieve the loss of my son, but also grieving this failure of not being able to save his life, right? And so grieving comes in all forms, including things at work, things in your personal life. I just recently got one of the best reviews from one of my followers, and she has not lost a child, but her adult children were not making the decisions that she thought were to their fullest potential. And she, watching me grieve the loss of my children, allowed her to give herself permission to grieve the loss of what she wanted for her children, right?
Yeah.
You know, so grieving dreams for yourself personally, but in business as well. And I think especially for women entrepreneurs, this space is full of men, and it's really hard to find a leadership book written by a woman. So thank you, Charlene, for doing that. You know, and men, their brains are different. They're just different, and that's okay. But I think women have a tendency to bring personal connection into business more often, which can be beautiful, or it can be so stressful on the entrepreneur that their physical health or mental health, suffers because of it.
Yes, definitely. Being an entrepreneur is a journey of ups and downs, certainly in grief and losses, but also incredible highs, as we know. And I like the fact that you've been able to parlay a lot of your different experiences into many different creative projects. And you have one coming up right now that it's a documentary. And I'm going to pause real quick so the audience can see a clip of this wonderful documentary.
According to reports, they probably died around 3 a.m. And I wake up at 3 a.m. almost every night.
That's my smiling girl. Hi.
Addressing grief is very difficult because you are afraid that you will never get out of it again.
Yep, that's Reggie and Daddy. Say hi, Daddy.
Hi. It was always an emergency. Even one time during a seizure, his femur snapped in half. As a nurse, I missed the signs of death. My biggest fear actually happened.
The day Maya died was horrible. Christy was on the floor screaming. It was just horrific. To hear those sounds, they will forever be with me.
When I realized there was exactly 45 days between the anniversary of Reggie's death and the anniversary of Maya's death, I knew that that was a sacred time. That's why I chose to do the 45 days of grief.
In the 6 months following grief, there's a 21% increase in fatal heart attacks.
10 years of praying, believing. One of the things that I hear often is your pain will pass, your circumstances will pass, just keep moving forward. And I don't think that's true of the grief that I'm experiencing.
What are you doing, Maya?
So when there's something that will not pass, how do you learn to live with it?
I love you, baby. It's okay.
Oh my gosh, look at him. Look at Reggie holding on to the dolphins.
I'm learning tools to manage the pain, to decrease its intensity, take care of myself, both mentally and spiritually and emotionally, so that those grief relapse days will be less. wish I would have slowed down just a little bit.
I don't even think I could hold myself up. And what's your last name?
Go to my B-U-N-D. Come on.
Say it again.
Come on.
And how do you spell that?
B-U-N-D.
So as you can see, that was a really powerful. Can you tell us a little bit more, Christy, about what inspired you to make the documentary and what the process was like?
So it was probably threefold reasons for creating the documentary. I truly believe that when you help other people, you are helping yourself.
Yes.
That is, the altruism is my number one reason for starting Mentally Strong, for doing, writing books, for doing this documentary. Two is oftentimes people see me in this kind of setting where I'm being professionally interviewed and they're like, oh, well, she's just strong. Like she doesn't really understand the pain. And the documentary is very raw and vulnerable and real to how painful grief is.
Yes.
And I think that is so important. And even before I knew I was going to do a documentary, I started filming, some raw footage on my grief, because I just feel like everything that's out there is very academic of this is the stages of grief, which, by the way, is not true. There are better theories on grief, and I have lots of videos showing that. But the documentary was about, let's start this conversation around how painful grief is and giving people space to grieve, and that it is okay and realistic to get up and go to work every day and look like you have it all together and go home and be falling apart, right? And that is okay. I think sometimes, and I hear this from a lot of mothers, it's like people think I'm okay, but I'm not.
Right.
Well, we want you to get up and shower and go do things like, and so it is about vulnerably showing how painful it is, but that you can find joy in your life, that intense grief like that changes you forever, but all grief changes you in the course of who you are and what your priorities are. Even natural grief of losing a grandparent. Now, that is okay. Now you don't have now you're at a stage in your life where you don't have a grandparent anymore. Like I've lost all of my grandparents, right? And I was talking to my mom the other day, and it's like the realization for her was like, oh my gosh, I am that last generation. I'm next, right? And so losing her parents changed her life forever. And, making those shifts instead of trying to go back to the person you were before grief. And so the documentary is to show that the reality of grief and how painful it is, and how to, be present for yourself and others in grief.
Yes, and it's so amazing. I had the privilege of seeing it, and I'm actually in it for a little clip, which is great. I can't wait for more people to see it. I know you have a film festival coming up. Can you talk a little bit about that, when it is and where it is?
So we have applied to tons of film festivals around the world. So if you have someone who is doing a film festival and would like to have us submit, please, let us know. We got into the LA Women in Film, which will be premiered August 17th in LA, Los Angeles.
Very good. I can't wait for more film festivals. I know that you have an amazing documentary there, and the more people who can see it, the better. I'm wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit more about the other resources you have and where they can find them.
Yeah. So mentallystrong.com and mentallystrong.com/grief is kind of the center of where you can find everything. The grief page will have all of our resources. I have a personal story, Pain and Purpose, my book, Pain and Purpose. I have a grief workbook called Grieve with Purpose. And I have a free grief course on the website. And the grief course is me going through that grief workbook intimately with you the second year after the grief documentary. So the grief documentary was between the 1-year anniversary of my daughter's death and the 6-year anniversary of my son's death. And for 45 days, I actively grieved and created this workbook. And then I went through it again the following year for the grief course. I think it's super important as we are going through grief, especially if you are unable to really organize your thoughts. It feels like chaos. It feels like overwhelm, to learn the Mentally Strong method. And those are paid courses and books. And I am launching a grief intensive where you can come and spend a week with me going through the Mentally Strong method, grief. How do you actually have a plan to move forward in choosing life, not letting go of grief, but choosing life around the pain of your grief. And so lots of things there. So mentallystrong.com.
Awesome. And I hope all of you will check out all of the things that Christy has put together. And there's so much that's valuable for all different types of people and processing grief in many different ways. Thank you so much, Christy, for sharing your story and all of your knowledge and wisdom with everyone. It's been a pleasure having you on the show today. And for the audience, I will catch you next time on Launch.